I never understood why people would re-engineer a data warehouse that wasn't broken. But the look in his eyes told me everything. He was a shark in a world of friendly fish. Mason, a new hire fresh from a trendy data science bootcamp, saw my decade of data pipelines and ETL scripts not as an intricate tapestry of logic, but as an ancient, messy relic. He swaggered into the office with a pristine laptop and a sense of entitlement that smelled of new money and privilege. He was the CEO's son, and they handed him control of the entire logistics data division as if it were a toy. I was just Faith, the veteran architect who had been keeping the whole system from a silent collapse with late nights, half-baked patches, and the unspoken knowledge of which data points to normalize and when. I knew my time was limited the moment he criticized my data cleansing algorithms. He said, "This is archaic. We should be using a modern, scalable architecture." I smiled, but my resolve hardened. What he called archaic was a series of workarounds that had saved the company from 3 lawsuits and a near-total loss of our most profitable client. I wanted to tell him that his modern architecture was like building a beautiful new library, but forgetting the books and the people who knew where they were. Instead, I quietly copied all my transformation scripts to a secure cloud drive, a digital time capsule. Legacy systems don't die, they just wait for someone to make a mistake. I tried to remain calm. I had seen 5 different lead data scientists come and go. Each one wanted to put their stamp on the system. Mason, however, was special. The kind of special that could cause a complete data integrity failure just to prove a point. He wanted to wipe the slate clean, and he didn't bother asking what each of my scripts did. I backed up my files that night, not because of paranoia, but because of respect for the ghosts in the machine. One script, in particular, named Normalize Vendor Amount Final FINA LV2, had saved us from a financial meltdown years ago. "You're going to break it," I muttered to myself as I uploaded the final archive. I then poured a cup of tea and watched him proudly announce his first major change to the master data table. A few days later, my access to several key dashboards was revoked. My name was removed from the project plan. The status of my work was changed to legacy cleanup pending. I was legacy. He hadn't asked why my time zone checker ran on a specific delay, or why a single line of code rerouted all high-value transactions through a separate validation service every day between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. He simply saw it as clutter and deleted it. I knew then that this wouldn't just be a failure, it would be a complete meltdown, and I wouldn't lift a finger to prevent it. He called his initiative The Purge during a Monday morning all-hands meeting, a cheesy PowerPoint presentation filled with trendy buzzwords and no substance. He promised a modern stack and clean code. A few junior analysts clapped, someone even cheered. I sat in the back of the room, chewing on my pen like it was the last piece of chocolate. I didn't say a word, because if I had, I would have had to explain that his modern stack still needed someone to account for the way some vendors use a different time zone for daylight savings and leap years. He made it crystal clear I was no longer relevant. My job title was still there, technically, as senior data architect, but my pull requests were constantly pending review. My meetings were rescheduled, and every time I tried to warn the new lead, Olivia, about the specific vendor logic for non-standard currencies, I was ignored. My name vanished from the project board. The scripts I had spent a decade refining were renamed with condescending suffixes like deprecated final log. Their new system was built on fancy diagrams and automated tests that never touched the true edge cases. I skimmed the new architecture. It was beautiful, clean, and utterly unprepared for the reality of our data. No mention of handling multi-decimal currencies like the Bahraini dinar. No correction layers for rounding behaviors. And nowhere did they account for the specific UTC plus 14 edge handling required for our suppliers in the South Pacific. I had patched that by hand years ago. I started leaving little comments, soft ones, in the project management system. I wrote things like, "The new manifest controller doesn't handle decimal truncation for currencies with non-standard fractions. Might want to double-check vendor 041 behavior from last year. It rolled over 6 hours early. There were no replies, not even a simple emoji. I sat alone at my desk while the rest of the team celebrated the supposed end of legacy systems with donuts and kombucha. Mason gave a toast about leaving the chaos of the past behind. I just smiled, watching them pull the pins out of grenades they didn't know were live. By Thursday, I was told not to touch the data pipeline anymore. Let the new team handle it, they said. We don't want to confuse the architecture. Confuse it? I was the architecture. But fine, let them play. The HR manager smelled of too much citrus and nervous sweat. She had a thick folder in her hands. I was called in without warning. Thank you for coming in, she said, her eyes blinking rapidly. We're realigning teams to better fit the strategic vision of the company. Translation: Mason wanted a clean slate. We appreciate all your contributions over the years, she continued, but at this time, we feel your skill set isn't aligned with the new direction. Not aligned. My face remained neutral, the way you do when someone rear-ends your car and then offers you a mint instead of their insurance information. There was no request for documentation, no knowledge transfer, no, could you walk the team through your architecture before you go? Because they thought I had nothing valuable to offer. They looked at a decade of stable data integrity and saw only clutter. I signed the exit paperwork with a steady hand. You've been a pillar of this team, the HR rep offered, her voice shaking. Pillars crack eventually, I said. I walked out past the glass-walled conference room where Mason and his new hires were whiteboarding buzzword soup: decentralized data logic, AI-driven fraud detection. I wanted to laugh or throw a chair, but I didn't. I was already gone. I had been planning my exit since the moment he called my work cute. I had spent the last 2 weeks encrypting my local work environment, wiping my command history, and scrubbing every README file of clues. The bridges I built, those brittle, beautiful bridges between the old and the new, they weren't in a document. They were in my muscle memory, in my sleep-deprived thoughts, in the little notebook I burned the night before. They never asked, so I never gave. I dropped my badge at the front desk. The security guard nodded at me, a wordless sign of respect. As the glass doors hissed shut, I felt it. Not sadness, not anger, but a contained pressure, a coiled spring in my chest. They had stripped the brakes off a semi-truck and floored it downhill. I was no longer in the passenger seat. I was just a spectator. The silence was intentional. No farewell posts, no humble brags about a new chapter, just absence. I became a ghost in a system that didn't believe in hauntings. Inside the company, they called it progress. Outside, I called it foreshadowing. 3 weeks later, my inbox was a graveyard. No quick pings, no emergency calls. It told me everything I needed to know. They didn't just forget me. They thought I was irrelevant. Perfect. Meanwhile, the data system began making strange noises. Not literal ones, but silent, cancerous failures that crept in without alarms. Analysts started flagging shipping manifests with total values of $0. Sometimes $1, always rounded. Too clean. I could picture the junior analysts blinking at the outputs like confused raccoons trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. They dug through the code base, found a cluster of scripts labeled Legacy Adjustments Deprecated, and promptly deleted them, assuming they were leftovers. Why wouldn't they? They weren't documented, not in the beautiful flowcharts Mason had laminated like he was designing a rocket ship. They thought the issues were the analyst's fault, or the vendor's fault, or maybe my fault, because bad data architecture lingers after you fire the person who understood it. And me? I was watching, just enough to read the social media posts mentioning chaos in the logistics department, just enough to note that their manifest accuracy had quietly dropped to 92%, just enough to see the CTOs were hiring data engineers, posts go from cocky to desperate. I didn't respond. I spent that month consulting for a competitor, a well-funded logistics firm that had heard through the grapevine that I was available. I wasn't looking to jump into another full-time mess, but after a small NDA, a remote sandbox, and a few redacted schemas, I was advising their migration team on how not to detonate their data system. It felt good, honest. They listened. They asked questions. They even paid on time. More importantly, they respected the ghosts. They knew the past isn't dead. It's just running in a headless container in some basement server. Every time I got a whiff of fresh panic from my old job, like the analyst post on a developer forum asking why currency precision in Java was different from Python, I'd sip my coffee and smile. Nothing is louder than silence right before a scream. The launch was live-streamed like a rocket to Mars. Big banners, champagne in the break room, a blog post written by marketing interns who thought a data monolith was a buzzword and not a very real beast they had just gutted. Mason stood in front of a ring light, his teeth too white for someone with no actual contributions, calling it a new era of financial clarity. Meanwhile, the only thing clear was that they had just publicly pushed a codebase with no idea how numbers worked. The new dashboard was beautiful. I'll give them that. Rounded corners, soft gradients, filters that actually responded. It was like handing a toddler an iPad. You'd be impressed until the thing started chewing the drywall. Then came the manifests, one by one, like digital snowflakes from hell. They landed in inboxes all across the country. Shipping containers valued at $12,000 listed for €1. 8,700 freight services listed at €1. Quarterly enterprise contracts with late fees, all billed for exactly one shiny copper penny. The clients didn't scream immediately. Most thought it was a mistake. Some laughed. A few figured it was some kind of promotional offer. But then the forums lit up. A Reddit thread titled, "Did company name just charge me 0 for a year of service?" hit the front page. Partners started calling. Vendors started asking questions. The CRM overflowed with confused emails, polite at first, then panicked. And me? I was on my couch, a glass of Merlot in my hand, watching it all like a late-night infomercial for corporate idiocy, because I knew exactly what had happened. Normalize vendor amount legacy, my baby. That function, tucked away, undocumented, and deeply ugly, was the glue that converted fractional data amounts into real-world charges that matched what the legacy database thought the numbers meant. Because guess what? That backend wasn't storing dollars. It was storing thousands of dollars, a leftover from a currency migration they tried in 2013 and abandoned halfway through because the CFO had a panic attack. If you didn't run the normalizer, the numbers got divided by 1,000, and their fancy new system, bless its heart, politely rounded that to a cent every single time. It wasn't a bug. It was the absence of me. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to leak anything. The system was functioning perfectly, just minus one small, quiet function built by a ghost they fired without asking what it did. Somewhere, Mason was probably on his fourth espresso shot, pacing between chat threads, trying to figure out why finance was melting down and why their shipping partners were flagging them for anomalous microtransactions. It was beautiful. I scrolled through the chaos, legs tucked under a blanket, sipping wine like I was binging prestige television. Every tweet, every confused social media post, every customer support screenshot was a line in a poem I didn't have to write. You can refactor the code, but you can't refactor the hands that kept it alive. The legal team was looped in by Tuesday. Not the in-house lawyers, but the real ones, the suits who charge in 6-minute increments. Revenue had cratered, not dipped, not slumped. It had cratered. The quarterly report showed a 97% drop in collections. The board called an emergency meeting so fast someone forgot to mute themselves while they were throwing up on Zoom. Mason started finger-pointing like a malfunctioning sprinkler. First it was the analysts. They should have caught it in regression testing. Then it was the finance team. Why didn't you flag the discrepancy sooner? Then, inevitably, it was me. She wrote the legacy system, right? This is probably some dormant logic she left behind to sabotage us. Nice try, because in the buried logs, those pesky, immutable Git history logs, was a little merge commit tagged with his initials. His commit message: clean up deprecated currency scripts, no longer needed. Under it, the deletion of 6 core functions, all mine. They hadn't been deprecated, they had been duct-taped miracles that kept 2 wildly incompatible systems talking just enough to fake being whole. Legal reviewed the logs. The board reviewed the revenue graph, which now looked like a ski slope to bankruptcy. The CEO pulled Mason into a private call. When he exited, his face was pale, his jaw clenched as if he'd bitten down on a USB drive. I felt nothing but power, not petty revenge, but power, because for the first time in 10 years, they had to reckon with what I had built. Not just the code, but the stability, the quiet scaffolding behind the scenes, the magic no one noticed until it vanished. And just when they thought the fire couldn't get hotter, the payment processor dropped the hammer. Subject line: urgent, SLA violation and service review pending termination. It turns out that flooding their system with microtransactions flagged them for fraud. Their SLA required maintaining a 98% charge accuracy. They were clocking in at 11%. Their processor was about to cut them off completely, which for a logistics company is like a grocery store getting banned from accepting money. The chaos was now a full symphony. The recruiter called first. "Hi, we have an urgent, senior-level consulting opportunity in the enterprise logistics space. Great compensation, flexible hours, very short term." I let him rattle off the desperate pitch before asking the only question that mattered. "Is the client the company I think it is?" A pause. A longer pause. "They've asked not to be named." I smiled. "Tell them I'll need payment in full up front. The contract will state I retain IP over any logic I rebuild, not license. Own. Also, they don't get to tell me when or how I come in. One day, and then I'm done." Another pause. I'll run it by them." An hour later, the real CTO, not Mason, called me directly. The tone was different. Not fake friendly, not angry, just hollow, like someone talking from inside a crater. "We didn't realize what your work was doing. We need your help, please." I said nothing for 10 full seconds. "Send the contract. I'll be there Monday." I showed up at 9 a.m. sharp. No theatrics, no smug grin, just a pressed black blazer, my laptop bag, and the precise energy of a surgeon prepping for an amputation. The office had changed. Fewer smiles, more huddled meetings in corners. The engineering team looked like they hadn't slept since the rollout. Mason, I didn't see him. I would later find out he'd been reassigned to special projects, the corporate version of a timeout chair. They tried to hand me a printout of their current architecture. I handed it back. "Start up the staging environment. Full access route, if you want it fixed." The new lead dev, a woman named Olivia, who looked like she'd been dropped into a pit of snakes, opened the terminal. We tried to recreate the legacy functions from scratch." I held up a hand. "Don't explain. Watch." And then I did something that made their jaws slacken. I didn't type, not at first. I narrated for 6 full minutes. I walked them line by line through the logic they deleted. Every weird patch, every silent fix, every bit of glue that didn't make sense unless you'd lived through 3 API versioning disasters, 1 international vendor fraud loop, and the year the IRS tried to backdate our invoice structure and broke everything. I described the normalization function like it was a ritual. When this runs, it reverts the currency scale to 3 decimal precision because your backend stores thousands of dollars, not dollars. If you skip this, every charge gets rounded down, every single one. A gasp. Silence. Someone actually muttered, "Holy." I kept going, calm, precise. I didn't gloat. I didn't sneer. I made them feel the gravity of every forgotten corner. And then I finally opened my laptop. One script, one commit, one single line reactivated the bridge, and just like that, the shipping manifests populated correctly. No bugs, no decimal chaos, just quiet, working math. When I stood up to leave, no one said anything for a moment. Then the CFO, gray-faced and glassy, whispered, "We owe you." I turned to him, zipped up my bag. "You owed me before." I walked out, not a queen returning to her throne, but a demolition expert who lit the fuse, watched the rubble fall, and sold you the blueprint for how not to die in it next time. There's a specific kind of silence that only happens in a room full of people watching a person they underestimated do the impossible. Slowly, methodically, with the grace of someone who doesn't need applause to prove they were right. That's what I walked into. Oh, donuts this time. No Mason speeches, just tired faces and too much caffeine, and a projector screen displaying broken graphs like blood pressure charts in cardiac arrest. I sat down, no small talk, just a terminal. "Okay," I said. "We're going to repair this in real time. You'll see every line." Nobody moved, not even a keyboard click. You could hear someone swallow in the corner. First, I cracked open the manifest formatting logic, the one they'd butchered like a YouTube tutorial gone wrong. The API payloads were clean, elegant, and useless. I showed them why. I showed them how the normalized amounts were being passed as is from the old backend without decimal correction. How their clean rewrite had severed 3 hidden conversion layers, each one compensating for a legacy quirk that had never been documented because no one ever asked me to. Then I began, one line at a time. Let adjusted amount equals normalized legacy currency, raw amount, vendor ID, billing date. Then the function itself, rebuilt from scratch. I didn't copy-paste it, I remembered it. Every edge case, every ghost rule. Vendor 041's 2-day offset for fiscal reporting. Vendor 087's undocumented switch to European comma decimal formatting mid-year. The April 2017 bug where manifests had to skip Sundays or the accounting engine threw nulls. They watched, eyes wide, jaws set. By line 10, the manifests were rendering correctly in the sandbox. By line 30, the totals synced with the bank transaction logs. By line 42, the system stabilized. No more pennies, no more zeros, just billing that made sense. I pushed the patch into staging. I didn't deploy to production. They could do that. This was a rescue, not a resurrection. Then I opened a new file and left behind a single-page report. Clean, bullet points only. Title: Legacy Logic Migration Advisory. Final summary. Core issue: missing normalization of currency payloads. Primary functions removed. Normalize currency payload legacy. Adjust vendor offset. Fiscal reconciliation buffer. Resolved via re-implementation of patched logic based on known vendor behaviors. At the bottom, a grayed-out comment in the logs. Next time, ask questions. I shut the lid of my laptop and stood. Your system should be stable now, I said, turning to the room. You'll want to audit the vendor mapping logic next. It's built on assumptions that stopped being true 2 quarters ago. Someone exhaled. Another whispered, Jesus. The CTO nodded like a man trying to keep a poker face with a royal flush in front of him. The CFO just blinked. Olivia finally breathed. And Mason? He wasn't in the room. Word was the CEO had already pulled him aside that morning, told him he was being reassigned to special projects. A padded room with no edges, no power, no code. Legal, meanwhile, had already amended my file. No fault, no liability, no residual claims on damages. Just a quiet little clause in the system log saying, issue resolved by former employee, status closed. I didn't gloat. Didn't wink or smirk or pose like I was shooting a tech company origin story. I just felt sharp, precise, like a scalpel that remembered what it was made for. Justified, not bitter, because when you're the one who held the whole damn thing together, and they only noticed after it collapsed under their arrogance, that's not revenge. That's architecture. They didn't even spell my name right on the termination paperwork, but now it was on the front page of a pitch deck being passed around Silicon Valley like a secret weapon. After I walked out that day, quiet, composed, no smug mic drop, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The crater was still smoldering. Let them sift through the ashes with tongs and regret. Instead, I filed for an LLC the next morning. 2 clicks, 1 name. Legacy logic. Not cute, not clever, just accurate. The kind of name that makes a CFO blink twice and a CTO sweat. The kind of name that says, we know where the bodies are buried. My first client? Their biggest competitor. A sleek little fintech firm that had watched the whole debacle unfold like a nature documentary on hubris. They called me before the ashes cooled. We'd like to make sure our manifest system never does that, they said. They paid up front, gave me root access. They listened. Within 2 weeks, I had their legacy systems humming like a restored engine. They wanted to rewrite from scratch. I said, let's not throw out the pipes while the water's still warm. They nodded. They got it. Word got around, not through press releases or case studies. Tech circles don't work like that. It's private messages. It's whisper networks. It's developers saying, hire her before your old system gets embarrassed by her. By month 2, I had a waiting list. By month 3, venture-backed startups were calling me for pre-mortems before they even touched their data stacks. And the final cherry? My old company reached out again. This time, not with panic, but with a contract. A polite, sanitized request to retain ongoing audit support for legacy system components and related infrastructure logic. A monthly retainer. Unlimited consultation hours. Terms dictated by me. They called it risk mitigation. I call it rent. Now they pay me 5 figures a month to stop them from setting themselves on fire again. I haven't taken a call in weeks. They know better than to ring unless it's dire. I trained their new lead, Olivia. She's sharp. She gets it. She knows not to delete what she doesn't understand. As for Mason, still on special projects. Last I heard, he was trying to lead an internal AI task force. The rumor is he asked ChatGPT how to fix the billing system. I hope it told him to subscribe to my newsletter. I didn't burn bridges. I wired them to blow and walked away smiling. Because legacy isn't the code. It's the person who kept it breathing when no one else knew how. And now I bill hourly for CPR. The lesson. This story teaches a powerful lesson about the value of experience and the danger of underestimating legacy knowledge. It's easy to dismiss old systems and the people who built them as outdated, but often, the most critical components of a business are the quiet, undocumented fixes that have been refined over years to handle real-world complexities. True progress isn't just about building new things. It's about understanding what you already have and why it works. A positive message. To the audience, this story is a reminder of your own worth. If you are an expert in your field, do not let others' arrogance or lack of understanding diminish your value. Respect yourself and your work enough to walk away from environments that do not appreciate your contributions. Your talent and experience are a powerful force, and when you recognize that power, you can turn a moment of dismissal into a catalyst for a brighter, more successful future on your own terms. Your skills are your own, and their value will be recognized by those who truly understand what it takes to build and maintain something that works.